So, Frank, I've been meaning to ask you about an interesting character, a Queens guy, a guy who passed away in 2023, a man who spent decades of his life involved in organized crime. His record goes back to at least the early 1960s. He was involved in bank heists, truck hijacking, any type of fencing of any stolen goods these guys can get their hands on, of course. A real life Goodfella in a movie sense, and of course, in a real life sense for his affiliations with Jimmy Burke. He would later be indicted in 2014 as the government believed he was one of the masterminds of the 1978 Lufthansa heist. They had also accused him of participating in the 1969 homicide of one Paul Katz alongside Jimmy the Gent Burke. 69, he would also get arrested with one Thomas D. Simone for another one of these bank heists. A man who, I imagine by the time you met him, he had been involved in that life for at least 40 years. And we're talking about Vinny Asaro. Frank, a very interesting guy. Tell me about the first time you met Vinny Asaro and what you heard, and maybe what were your assumptions about the Bonnano Capo, Vincent Asaro.
I met Vinny through a guy I was around, who was Vito Grimaldi. I was around Vito Grimaldi for a minute, and it was kind of like by default because Vito was around. His captain before Vinny was this guy named Louis Restivo. If you guys are into the mob stuff, you've heard of Louis Restivo. He was partners with Joe in Casablanca restaurant. He was his maitre d' as well. But he had gotten demoted, and the reason for that was because he was overstepping a lot. He was patronizing too much with the 101st crew. Him and Salvatale, who's Joe Messino's brother-in-law, who ended up flipping. We all know that story. And while Joe was in jail, they were going to 101st and hanging out with that crew, and instead of just tending to what needed to be tended. And a lot of people were putting complaints about Louis. One was my uncle Cheech Navarro, who was also under Louis for a minute, and Louis tried to tax him on his Joker poker video poker machines, and they had gotten into it. And by the time Joe came out, he says he just separated Sal from Louis, and then demoted Louis, and Vito was under Louis. He had then put him with Vinny Asaro, and that's how I met him. By that time, I was on record with Vito. I kind of separated, part of ways from my uncle for a bit. Even though I went to Vito, I had to get permission. So I started hanging out with Vito Grimaldi, and we started meeting this Vinny Asaro. So yeah, definitely different character from the mobsters I grew up with. Very edgy guy. We got along. I mean, he never, like, I was hoping he never fucking broke bad on me, but he would break bad on very very commonly. He would break bad on Ronnie all the time. We would meet up on Tuesday. We ended up having doing sports gambling together, and when I mean we would meet up, it was Vito's son Joe, who I was very close to, and another friend of mine. Let's just call him Nick. Okay, so we'll call that guy Nick. I don't like talking about him. And we would meet up. You go to his restaurant, and it depends. It seemed like as a gambler, I could relate. I don't know if he had won that day, lost that day, but that's who you would get. And he wouldn't take it out. Obviously, we would go there. Vito always paid the tab. Uh, we would talk about the week's sports or what's coming up, or he used to love going. He being Vinny going out on Saturdays would invite us. We never took the invitation. Like, it's not that I disliked him. He's just uncomfortable with being around. And
You said he was
I mean,
edgy. What do you mean by edgy? Just explain that.
he was very athletic for his age. He liked to play paddleball a lot, and I guess that's how he used to vent or whatever. But I mean, one time some lady asked if she could get the coffee on the house, and I don't know what the fuck happened that day. after she wanted to be comped to coffee, but something she felt wasn't right, whatever. And he just blew off the handle, ended up throwing her out. Get the fuck out of here! Don't come back. You always find something wrong, that kind of shit. This is a restaurant in Long Island. We used to go there every Tuesday.
His
We did
restaurant.
that
Long
for about a year and a half, 2 years, until
Okay.
until Vito and Vinny finally get into it, and they get separated. I'll get into that though. So the summer comes, and it's fireworks season, and we were buying fireworks from actually in Greenpoint at the time in Williamsburg off of Joe C, who was Joe Grimaldi's brother-in-law, and then now at this point we started buying them off of Vinny's son's connection, and it seemed like anytime we did anything with Vinny would fucking just fall apart. I mean, even the sports, we start the sports and we go like lose like 60, 70,000. People are killing us right off the bat, and took a long time to 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 make to get out of that. It took like a year and a half. I mean, it was a losing deal, and a lot had to do with Vinny would convince us that we should just take all the action and not hedge anything and just give him all the action. And he'd have a saying that was like, you see the bookies, they all drive Cadillacs just to persuade us that we were doing the right thing. And Vito was like, ah, man, this is just this doesn't seem right. We're losing all the time. And then even the fireworks, we end up buying the fireworks, and thank God we separated two different places to store them, because one of them ends up getting busted. Some Indian guy ends up telling on us. Um, he was buying stuff and selling stuff on the right in the storefront. And 6 o'clock in the morning, we ended up freaking piping his ass. The next time we hit him right in the fucking head.
Sheesh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It came up in the news. It was like the daily paper in that area that
Yeah.
store owner leads to main supplier. You know what I mean? And he gets one of our guys
Jeez.
busted. So they contributed to that guy getting his head fucking busted open at 6 in the morning. But that was back then. Back to Vinny though. Yeah, he just and poor Ronnie, yo, man. And Ronnie was made, I think, at this point. He'd just gotten made. He'd lace into him for every little fucking thing. And I remember talking about it with Vito. He goes, that's not good. He does that in front of everybody. That's not really proper. But I guess he got his payback when he got demoted and Ronnie got promoted. You know, I don't know if that's the way he wanted it to be, but Ronnie, but
Yeah, two
karma's a
things.
bitch.
Ronnie, you're speaking about his nephew, Ronnie
Ronnie
G.
G, yeah, yeah,
And just
yeah,
for
yeah.
clarity, around what years are we discussing? Like when you first knew Vinny?
96, 95,
Oh, mid
97.
90s. Okay, mid 90s. All right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So,
So he was already like a 60-year-old guy at that point.
he was in terrific shape. He was in terrific shape, good shape for his age. You could tell he was older, but in really good shape. He was like in jail shape, if you know what that means. His outside people are different from inside the can, but in real good shape. He had his crew. His crew was Sandro. Like he had my call my cousins, but they're cousins by marriage. The Benventries, both father and son, Jack, and who was really close with my brother Paz, Joe, and his dad, Nene, who was my Uncle Cheech's godfather. So they were in the crew. So I was familiar with a lot of the people there. And Vinny's a Castello Medici too. I forgot to mention that. Um, we both are. His granddad, I think, came here, or his father came here very young. But they're three-generation gangsters. The Asaros are. So four as I think about it.
Yeah, and his uncle, if for those of you who don't know, porn czar, Times Square real estate magnate in his own right, Mickey Zaffarano, Michael Zaffarano, Bonnano Capo, was his
Right.
uncle. I'm sure that didn't help either. But I want to ask you something about him as you viewed him, your perception of him, even like before you met him. was there anything out there like, oh, this? And I'm speaking in like movie sense, like, oh,
Gotcha.
this guy's like the real life Goodfella right here, or like
Yeah,
what
that
was
was
out there
those.
about him?
Exactly. Well, one was that it wasn't like got picked up on that Lufthansa case, and then he was like,
Right, right, not at the
oh
time.
wow, he was involved in that too. That rumor was even back then out that he had something to do with the Lufthansa um heist, and he was also very very close with Jimmy Burke. So we knew that. We knew that was a thing, and some. It was even rumored that he had some of the money, but I mean, if he did, it didn't show, and he didn't look broke, but he didn't look, like one of the gangsters at that time when I was growing up with a lot of money. Um, but he was a captain, and obviously Joe liked him. Joe, he was one of the rare Bonnano guys out in Ozone Park in East New York. There wasn't many unless they lived there. You know what I mean? Operating out of that neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There
Well,
wasn't any.
let me ask you, like, if you would
Sure.
compare, because he seems like a different guy. Obviously, he's very Americanized. But if you can compare, like, let's say him, like a Vinny Asaro, compare his
Mhm.
lifestyle, his criminal record, the things that he was doing to like maybe like an elderly, like Sicilian guy that you might have known that came to this country in like, the 20th century. What is like the difference between those type of
A
gangsterism?
lot, a lot. But I'll even go better because I used to see them even coexist together. Vito Grimaldi and Vinny, they were two different. They were very different. And even though Vito would never say it, he seemed like he made him uncomfortable a lot of times, just on the way his demeanor. But he wouldn't talk bad about him. But like just like Vito wouldn't talk bad about other gangsters. That's who he was. He believed in that life, that brethren. He taught me a lot about that life, and I've said it before. Obviously, I flipped, but he's not the reason. Um, and that's neither here nor there. But back to him, they were two different. One wants you to know he's a gangster. I always said this, the American one, and the other one tries to hide it as much. The other one, Vito was just a class act. There was. I'm not saying Vinny wasn't. I mean, he done his time. I know a lot of people that are into this stuff. They'll give you the man's man, whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, he did his time, and he was that guy who would definitely do life in a minute. That's no both of them for that matter, but different, totally different. I remember he had gotten locked up. I think on a car, something to do with cars back in '97 or '98, and he was in jail with with Bobby Glasses, who was there for the state case of them two guys at the bar years ago. And there was another kid I grew up with, David Antonucci, and David Antonucci and he was like the head of that Young Guns crew, that farm team. And a kid that I grew up with, tough kid, very tough kid. They would get into it all the fucking time in there. That poor Bobby says, you know what? I almost had enough. The other one would go, "I'll break your ass." The other one would go, "You break nothing." They go back and forth because they were just for like
Stuck in the middle
for
between
about
these
a
two.
year trying you're right to get that shit resolved. Vinny wanted a piece of when he came out, but I guess it got rolled over. Nothing happened. But David didn't give. David was the type of guy. David Antonucci, him and his brother Kevin, and he has another kid Michael who was just not right in the head. Committed a crime for no fucking reason. Killed a kid on the train tracks for just because he wanted to. He was that type of fucking. He was a bad kid. But I grew up with them in Ridgewood, and then they ended up moving to Woodhaven, Ozone Park. So I knew them a long time. So David wasn't one to take shit either, and wasn't really didn't give a fuck who you were. He was that guy. But yeah, Bobby was like they were driving me crazy, both of them, and I could see that I couldn't be in jail with neither one of them. They would drive me nuts. Um, but back to
You said the other day, that I don't recall who you said who you were with, but you said something when we were speaking the other day. You said, Oh, thank God we're not under this guy. Imagine that. We'll be pinched in a
Well, that was
second.
the guy I was telling you about that I'm gonna call Nick. We
Okay.
we were like, you know, being around Vito Grimaldi was, and this is a kid I brought into to not into the Bonannos. He was actually a Gambino guy being groomed by the Gambinos, and apparently I don't know. He's still in the life, whatever. And we were close, really really close, and we were talking like, you imagine if we were around this fucking guy instead of somebody like Vito. He goes, shit, would have like fucking four bodies, fucking beating, fucking crippling people every now and then. Because he was that guy, was very, well, and you hear it from Gene. He was always ready to fucking send people anyway, you know what I mean? And not to take away from any, but me and my ex close friends were definitely ones that didn't need much stirring up, you know what I mean?
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, he would beat that, amazingly, he would beat the Lufthansa stuff and the Paul Katz homicide and all that. But a couple of years after that, he would have to go to prison for a little bit for his bride. Yeah, and I get the picture of somebody with a short temper. A little road rage incident turns into a automobile arson.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so is that when you heard a story like that, do you say, "Oh, that's pretty typical of that
He would
individual"?
flip off the handle, and eventually him and Vito get into it, and it's he had borrowed money from Vito Grimaldi, and Ronnie had come to, you see, to see Vito about something, and Vito had asked Ronnie, when you see your uncle, and he puts up his hand, he tell him that he owes me, this, meaning 5 G's. And Nick is in the office. I'm not there yet. We usually went up there just to talk shit. We talk anything sports. It wasn't criminal, all that. It was just, he had us more like, not only around him, but we were like family also. So as that goes, they don't think nothing of it. Ronnie goes back, tells Vinny, well, Vito had asked for that money, and he didn't like the way he asked him. He felt that he had to ask him himself instead of going through Ronnie. He flies off the handle on the phone. He calls him up and tells, "Who the fuck are you to talk like that?" And Vito's not one to take shit either. So he goes back. He goes, "Well, who the fuck are you?" And they start going back and forth. This is according to Nick, who, we didn't hold many secrets from each other. And he goes, he's going, "Fuck you." And the other guy goes, "Fuck you too." And they're going back and forth. "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you." Finally, this is one of those things you got to go to your upper guy, and he separates Vito from Vinny. Thank God, we didn't have to go see him anymore. And but Joe, his son, was made at the time. Nikki was Joe with Vinny. Uh, Joe Grimaldi with Vinny, and that was Joe Messino's move. He says, "You go with your daughter's father-in-law, which is Joe Saunders, and he stays with your son stays with Vinny, so he keeps the peace that way." That was Joe being one of his diplomatic moves. He was good at that. Joe Messino.
How was Messina and Asaro? Because obviously they both
They
went,
got along. They got along
yeah.
until his hands were tied. He would borrow money from people, not pay. Fucking in one incident he went to. And listen, I wasn't a saint either. If I was, if you had to pick between who was I closer to on the streets, like as a person who, and not who I want to be. Like I would always want to be, Grimaldi over of Vinny Asaro, but vices take over. I was more like a Vinny Asaro, in more ways than one. But I wasn't that much. I wasn't a good person out there, and Vinny Asaro basically, he went up to a guy at his funeral and told him that his father owed him money. The guy who died, stuff like that. Real fucking grimy shit. You know what I mean? So that's where we're at with that. But yeah, they ended up separating them, and eventually got demoted, which I'm not surprised, and that's what happened.
Yeah, there's another, and you don't have to speak to this, but there's other stories out there alluding to his ordering of a shooting of a woman. based on something she did to someone in his family.
I'm
And
totally against that shit, but I
she
think that was
survived. It was
I
lucky
don't
she
know.
survived.
Yeah, I've heard that. Of
Yeah,
course, I heard that. So I think that was after my time, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did hear that story.
Just to
Look, if
paint
I
a
have a
picture of
daughter,
a guy who seems to have a really short temper, and
yes,
I hesitate to say petty, maybe, or I don't know what the word
could
is.
be, could be.
Yeah,
I mean, then you get somebody like his son, right? And there's nothing but good people. People love that guy, his son
yeah,
Jerry, and they have nothing but good things to say about him. They eventually got into it, but it was his dad. Don't matter. Family's family at the end of the day.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I don't know. Back to that woman who got shot.
yeah.
She didn't act like a woman. I think what she did was broke a bottle over his daughter's face or something like that.
Uh huh.
No,
Uh huh.
and what do you do? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah.
You get somebody else to do the same thing to her. You can't make somebody get away with that.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
never ever had any beef with any woman, physically, anything. I
Yeah.
walk away, but I mean that I don't know. I never been in that situation, so I can't speak.
Yeah. And on a side note, the woman we're speaking of, I'm not going to say her name. I run a channel, NYC Crime Spot. She's commented over there a couple times. I
Right.
commented back to you. So if you hear this, I told you to email me at nyccrimespot@gmail.com. I would love to speak to you. I just thought
Yeah,
I'd throw that in there.
yeah. I mean, you hear her story, but
Yeah.
you reap what you sow, and you got to be careful with stuff like that, especially
Yeah.
people's children.
Yeah. Yeah. So Vinny Asaro, interesting character, man.
There you go. That's my Vinny Asaro. I probably have more. I just can't think of them because you got to remember, I was we were interacting within I don't know a year and a half, 2 years between between going there at sports and me being around Vito for a while.
Yeah. And as I mentioned previously, he passed away in 2023. Maybe
Hey,
if you're
rest
not
in
into
peace. Rest in peace.
Yeah, if you're not into like organized crime history or anything, his name may not ring a bell, but it certainly rang a bell in the streets. He was around for shit 50 plus years, doing his thing. Seemed to be totally committed to being an outlaw till basically the day he died.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And thank you everybody for listening. I mean, we're coming in with good stuff pretty soon. Um, what do we have soon?
Well, we're going to be speaking about your uncle, Chief
Yes,
Navarra.
yep.
We're going to be
And
covering the year 1972.
right, the year we immigrated, and a great year. A lot of stuff was going on, and one of my favorite movies, real life movies, based on real life, takes place. The actual event does, so we'll speak about that too.
Yep.
And much more. We got a lot more. I'm not even done with the old timers, so we're here for at least a while.
Yep. And guys, check us out on Spotify. I started uploading the YouTube content to Spotify. We got 4 episodes up there right now. Thank you for the people that followed us on there so far. We really appreciate that. And if anyone's listening, please, if you have Spotify, just follow us. Give us a rating if you can. If not, just hit the follow button. Let us
And
know
do
that
we
you
have a
care.
live soon, Brett?
Yeah, yeah. We'll be doing another live before the month ends. What is it, the 23rd? Yeah, we'll do another
Yeah, we
live.
try to get 3 episodes down. Then we do a live, and then we have
Yep.
a Q&A for you guys to come in. We will have a guest. I'm sorry. Shout out to James. I'm just
Dr. James
James
Bucciolato.
Bichelato,
Yep.
Doctor James there, and he will be joining us eventually. Um,
Yep. Before month's end, we will have a live stream. We'll be speaking to you whether it's before or after Thanksgiving. We both, want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving over here in the United States.
very and anywhere else, and anywhere else in the world,
Eh,
especially out anybody
Yeah,
in the military, anyone.
of
But
course, of
happy
course.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for listening to 52 Topics with Frank Fiordolino.